I was a child when I first got my dog, Paws. My father was away on a business trip. He went on a lot of those, and somehow I convinced my mother to get a dog. We went together to the pound, and there he was. This pathetic-looking thing huddled in the corner by the concrete walls. He reminded me of myself. I didn't have a lot of friends, and I kind of felt like he looked. Weak. Sad. Well, he waddled over to me, licked my face, and that was that. He was my best friend. Well, nothing happened for about a year as Paws grew up. He turned into a rather strong-looking dog, a big change from him being this pathetic thing slumped over in the corner. A year after I brought him home from the pound, I heard a knock on the door. Walking over, I saw an old, harmless-looking man with gray hair smiling through the glass. I smiled back, opened the door, and before I could even say hello, Paws leapt onto him and bit deep into his face. I tried to get him off, but he just kept tearing away at the old man's flesh. We lived in the city, and a police officer happened to be patrolling nearby and hear the commotion. He took out his gun to shoot Paws, but I screamed and leapt in front of him, shielding him from the officer. The policeman yelled at me to get out of the way, but I loved that dog. The officer kicked Paws off the old man, and my dog cried out in pain. Then, something strange happened. As the officer knelt down to help the old man up, we saw something on the ground next to him. A human ear. The policeman and I just stared at the ear. Then we both looked at the same time back up at the old man. Had Paws torn his ear off? But no. The old man, though bloodied, sure enough had 2 ears. The officer and I stared at each other, both a little confused, and that's when the old man took off, running down the driveway. I watched as the police officer paused for a few moments, then put 2 and 2 together. Something wasn't right here. He chased down the old man and pinned him up against the wall, cuffing his hands and calling for backup. It wasn't until a week later on the news I found out that that old man had been collecting the body parts of little boys. He was indeed a monster. There were 2 other occasions as well, one when I was a little older. I would walk Paws in a park near our home. The funny thing was this park was packed with people, so you'd think it would be safe. Well, every time I would take him, there was a beautiful older woman just sitting on a bench on the far edge of the park. She looked a bit out of place, but she seemed harmless, as she would smile and say hello. From the first time Paws saw her, sitting on that bench, he lowered his head and growled deeply. I figured it was nothing. The last time he had growled had been the old man, but this just must be a coincidence, right? Well, I was wrong. The next day in the park, the woman was nowhere to be seen, and Paws ran over to the bench where she would sit and began to dig. I tried to stop him, but before I could, I saw a bone. It looked human. He kept on digging, and the police were called. A few days later, again on the news, it turns out that that beautiful woman had murdered her husband and 2 children last summer. burying them in plain sight, right in the park. Well, many years have passed and Paws is older now. 13, actually. He doesn't walk as well as he used to. He can barely see anymore, and his eyes are cloudy, as if a mist is covering them more and more. I can barely stand the thought of losing my best friend. Well, I met Colleen about 5 months ago, and she is everything I could ever want. Smart, beautiful, kind, loyal. She's wonderful. She even volunteers at a home for sick children who are dying. She stays with them as they go through their last moments. It's amazing the type of woman that she is. I'm so lucky. Well, I had just proposed the week earlier and couldn't wait to introduce her to my parents. And, of course, Paws. We flew across the country, holding hands the whole time on the plane flight like we were teenagers. When we got there, we got in a cab and headed over to my parents' home. Opening the door, my mother smiled and instantly gave Colleen a hug. My father walked over behind her, smiling as well, and told her welcome to the family. John has said such wonderful things about you. I asked about Paws, and they said nothing. Knowing how much I loved my dog, they were dreading telling me the news. They had taken him to the doctor, and he would have to be put to sleep in the morning. The doctor had nodded when they explained how much I loved Paws, and that they wanted him to pass away at his home. He was in the other room, laying on a blanket and sleeping. He couldn't walk anymore, and hadn't opened his eyes for a couple days. Colleen gave me a hug, as she knew how much he meant to me. Fighting back tears, I nodded to my parents and walked with Colleen into the guest bedroom, where my best friend was laying down. I put my hand on his back and put my forehead against his. His eyes were closed, but as I continued to talk to him, he slowly opened his eyes. Barely able to move, his tail started to wag slowly, and he dug his head into my chest. And we both just sat there, together. My protector. It was then I heard footsteps behind me, and remembered that Colleen was here too. I had forgotten all about her. Paws turned his head and looked at Colleen through his cloudy eyes.